Victor. Thank you. Alrighty. Nice to meet everyone. First time I've done a live speaking thing like this in a while, so exciting stuff. Agenda, we'll get right into it. So I'll do a quick intro on me for anyone that's unfamiliar. And then I just want to go into variables for success, kind of to preface a lot of the content that we're going to unpack today. It is going to be pretty theory heavy during parts of it. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Maybe introduce yourself just so I could put a name to the face the first time. But we'll preface with some variables for success. And then we're going to get right into our topic for the day. So intro to cEV versus ICM, especially for players coming from the cash background or cash world where everything is cEV deep stacked. Players typically tend to struggle when it is mid stages, late stages, and heavy ICM. And that's what we're going to try to focus on today and get you a bit of an understanding as to how to differentiate between the two and how we can make some basic adjustments to our strategy. So we'll get into the topic deep dive. It's going to be pretty much the bulk of the conversation today. Again, if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll try to answer. And then if you want to save your questions for the end as well, we'll try to do some Q&A towards the end. A little bit about me. This slide might be familiar to some students that I could recognize in the room here, but I started a while ago. I started about 15 years ago playing when I was at Western University. One of my roommates actually dropped out of college dropped out of university to play 2 cent, 5 cent, and 5 cent, 10 cent online, back when PokerStars used to give a crazy rakeback deal. And he would make $1,000 a month, and he was just happy at the time, putting all his money into silver. So I hope he kept his money in silver, by the way. But that was kind of my first entry point into poker, just like even understanding what there was to the game as far as more than just the first layer of it being a card game. Fast forward really to, I guess, 2019, right before COVID. That's when I really started to take it more professionally or semi-professionally at the time. And focused all of my attention to MTTs as opposed to cash. And when COVID hit, this was actually great timing because since all of the venues had closed, there was almost, you could say, a secondary poker boom where a lot of sites were just gaining a lot of traffic. So 2020 through 2025 was an incredible 5 years for me. I was inducted into BitB, where I was coached directly by Patrick Leonard and some of his sub-coaches. And that's really what expedited my learning of the game. And eventually I reached out to him and asked if it'd be okay if I could start coaching based on our contractual agreements, and he gave me the green light. So variables for success. If I could ask the group, I guess, what are your top 5, and we'll try to pick 5 people here, top 5 variables. So let's say, like, I'll give you, but the first one is having a good, strong theoretical background, right? If there's another variable that you could say for success in poker, what would it be?
I would say for me, keeping your money in the long run.
Yes, bankroll management. Yeah. Yeah. Any others? Mindset. Yeah. Yeah, definitely a good one. So tilt control, emotional control. Yeah. Any others? No. So above all else, and this is just again to preface a lot of the theoretical content we'll get through, if I could rate, let's say on a scale of 1 to 50, a perfect 50 out of 50 player would score 10 in each of these. Innate ability, game sense, and intuition. So this is your street poker smarts. You just have a good understanding of how the game works, if someone's full of shit or not. That is where you're going to make the most money in the game. When you get to big river spots, if you're capable of pulling the trigger and understanding where your opponent is at in the hand, a lot of that is really just intuition. You can study these spots and have a good theoretical understanding of how to approach these spots. But a lot of players, when I think of guys like Bryn Kenny, for example, in the high stakes world, they're actually not as studied as you would think. They just have a very good intuition and understanding of how to play the people game. Of course, they've studied over the years, but they're the ones who have that very strong innate ability. Number 2 would be game theory, strategy, and concept knowledge. So again, your book smarts Are you studying enough? Do you have a good theoretical background of the game? Emotional IQ, so tilt control, presence, curiosity. This is going to be a big one as well. You can be a phenomenal player, but if you can't control your tilts or be present at the tables, then you're going to be leaking quite a bit of EV. Bankroll management and game selection. So this is something that I talk with prospective students a lot about, is how to optimize your game selection if you're really looking to make a living out of playing poker. And then your circle of peers, your study group, and your mentors. So if you surround yourself with those who are ideally a level above you, you're going to start to level up your game, right? So topic for today, we're going to go into, again, number 2, game theory, strategy, and concept knowledge. That's going to be kind of the subtopic, or the main topic, and then the subtopic is intro to chip EV. So what is chip EV? Chip EV measures the profitability of a decision purely if all of the chips are equal, right? So in cash games and in deep stacks, there's not really any risk associated with making your decisions. ICM is a mathematical formula that translates your tournament chips into real money equity. Key takeaway is that it is non-linear, and so there are risk factors. I'm sure you've heard of risk premium, which we'll get into, which is going to influence the decisions that you make deeper in tournaments and the way that you structure your strategy. Any questions here? Pretty straightforward. Why should we have a variable strategy in MTTs? Before that answer's there, does anyone want to take a guess? Why is it good to have a purely chip EV strategy in an MTT? Yes or no? And why? Anyone want to take a stab?
No, because all the money's at the top, so the deeper you are, the more value your chips have.
So what if it was not all the money at the top and it was a survivor? 50% of the field gets paid, 50% doesn't.
Then it would be very different.
Yep.
You can't win a poker tournament in the first few levels. You can definitely lose a poker tournament in the first few levels.
It's true. I wouldn't encourage that mindset though, because it will lead you to make unoptimal decisions where you preserve your tournament life too much, and you'll probably be bleeding EV in spots where you shouldn't. So I think that's a common mistake made by those that are definitely shifting from cash to tournaments, is they'll worry too much about preserving their life and looking for good spots in early stages. But yeah, a static strategy is going to ignore the changing financial landscape. So for sure, spot on. But we also have to consider the payouts of the tournament. So back in the day, they used to have like 50-50. You could double your money if you survive halfway through. It's important to understand what kind of tournament you're playing, because it will adjust your strategy and some of the ICM decisions that you make. So if it's a satellite, that's like an extreme example where that we'll get into, where you either get paid 0 or 10x usually. Is one strategy more profitable than the other? Again, it's not really a battle of what strategy you should choose, as we'll get into some of them. But you should have a blended approach. And as ICM gradually makes its way through the tournament from 100% of the field to 0, you have this sort of sliding scale of how your strategy shifts. So what is the best currently? Or I guess, where does ICM strategy lack? What is the best? When you're browsing through solvers, GTO Wizard is a common place to study. It's not a real solver. It's just a library of solves. These types of study materials are going to lack because they are limited in only the information that is inputted for every single player based on the perceived range that the solver gives it. So you might look up the spot that you played in the solver later and feel like you made a big mistake, or feel like, hey, you nailed it. But the reality is the solver is only going to give you the inputs by default that are theoretically correct. Every single player at the table that you're playing at, they're not playing a theoretically correct game, or at least not 100% theoretically correct. So not to dissuade you from looking at a solver to fact check but it's not necessarily going to be the best way to fact check if your decisions are good or not. Alrighty, so this is something that I think is super interesting for a lot of tournament players who have a pure chip EV strategy, and what I mean by that is they're always going for the win. If we go through the very far right column, what you'll see here on the bottom right is the chip EV strategy. So someone that doesn't really care about ICM, ICM is for poor people, they are going to win the most. So they're going to have the most number ones in the tournament. Most number one finishes, let's say, throughout the year. They're going to win more often, and it may seem on paper like they are the most successful poker players. That is a false reality, because just because they're winning the most, they're actually not necessarily the most profitable. They are just playing a strategy that optimizes for winning as opposed to for profitability. And I think this is super, super important to understand if you're planning on playing, let's say, online tournaments, thousands of tournaments a year, because you have to optimize for profitability if your goal is to make it a living. You can't optimize for always winning the tournament, because you will have decisions deep in ICM where you might be lighting money on fire trying to go for the win. So you can see the player who optimizes for going for the win, they're going to have the lowest cash rate. They're going to be busting out 89% of the time, not making the money. And the player who's optimizing for a proper MTT strategy will cash about 16% of the time as opposed to 10. They're also going to make more final tables. So you can see here, in aggregate, 3 to 5, it's like 5% if I add all the numbers up really quick, I guess, where they make the final tables in this 200 field MTT. Whereas the player who's optimizing for chip EV is probably ballparking it, at least 1 or 1.5% below that. In the long run, this is going to yield the following results. The player who's constantly going for the win, next slide here, is going to actually be a negative 12% ROI player. The person who's playing a proper ICM strategy is going to have a winning ROI. That was a lot of information. Open to questions. No? Okay. Let's get into risk premium. I guess raise of hands here. Are most of you guys cash players, tournament players? Okay, raise of hands. Raise of hands, tournament players. Okay. Raise your hand for tournaments. Okay, mostly tournament players. Risk premium is going to be a very important topic to understand in tournaments. How this specific concept is going to affect your decisions later in tournament stages. What is risk premium? It is a tax that you pay or that you associate with the equity requirement that you need when you have all-in decisions. So let me give you an example. If you and I are flipping a coin and I told you we'd put $100 on the line, well, it's 50-50 that you'll basically break even. Now, if I told you that, let's say there was, if I told you my exact strategy where I would always, let's say, have paper, but if I caught you with rock, you would have to pay me like 2x, whatever I'm paying you. Well, now you have this tax that's associated with your decision to try to beat me. It kind of works the same way in tournaments, where if you have a chip advantage over someone else, they have a negative risk premium against you. So I'll show you as a visual example what this actually looks like. But in layman's terms, breaking even on chips, if you have a decision where you have a profitable call, it may not be good enough because your decision is now tied to pay ladders. This is typically what a risk premium chart is going to look like. On the left, we have what is known as symmetrical stacks. Everyone is the same, 40 big blinds. And we can probably assume this is a bubble where everyone has an 11% risk premium associated with their decisions. So what that means is, let's say you have pocket queens in the big blind and the small blind jams on you. Well, you know that you have to have, or let me give you a different example. Let's say you have king 10 offsuit. You know that you're going to make this call X% of the time based on the dynamic of the tournament, the pay ladder. Sometimes you'll call king 10, sometimes you'll fold king 10. It depends. Are there shorter stacks on the table? In this specific situation, let's say, where it's all symmetrical and maybe there's a pay jump, what this is telling us is that we need to call 11% tighter, or have basically 11% more perceived equity. So and in a spot where we perceive that we need 33% equity, we actually need 44, or we'll be losing money. This example here, maybe it's a little bit better actually. So this is staggered stacks. The way that you would read something like this, if you're ever interested in studying risk premium more in depth, you can see the covering stack, the big blind on the bottom left, there in the green, they basically have no added risk premium on the bubble against any other stack because they cover everyone. Let's say the low jack at 29 big blinds, well, he covers the under the gun 8 players. So there's not really like a major risk premium difference there. But when making decisions against the big blind for his stack, he has to factor in that he needs another 12% equity. So this is, in a nutshell, how risk premium is going to affect your decision to call off your stack. Any questions before we get into some range adjustments? Nope. Cool. Alrighty. Early position ranges and responses, 100% chip EV. So what I have here is just a screenshot from GTO Wizard. This is going to give you a very basic opening range for early in the tournament, 100 big blinds effective. The early position player is opening 19% of hands. So this is, again, theoretically correct. Your whale might open 40%. Your rock might open 5%, right? This is the cutoff response. The cutoff is going to do quite a bit of calling. So the way that we can read this is, they're folding 80% of their hands. They're continuing with 20. Out of the 20% of hands they continue with, about 1/3 is going to want to 3-bet. 2/3 are going to want to call. So mostly calling. The cutoff player is going to have a pretty mixed strategy. To me, I always tell people this is impossible to replicate. You cannot balance a 10% 3-bet with a specific combo. What I always tell my students is create a simplified strategy for yourself. It's going to be a lot easier to follow. This is more or less a strategy that I would replicate. So you can see here in the previous example, the cutoff player is going to do a lot of flatting with small pocket pairs, suited connectors. Does anyone want to take a stab at why we would call these hands specifically?
They play better post flop?
They play well post flop, yes. When we're this deep, these are very high implied odds hands. So 7 high is not good pre-flop. Pocket 2's kind of questionable pre-flop. These hands benefit from seeing the entire board. So pocket 2's is going to want to see a set. It's going to benefit from seeing all 5 cards. 7-6 suited is going to need to make a straight, a flush. It's going to benefit from seeing all 5 cards. The deeper we are, the more implied odds we have. The more we are willing to flat some of these hands deeper stacked in position. So very similar concept to cash game, although I suppose in cash games we're 3-betting some of these hands quite often too. The strategy that I personally simplify to is something like this. So I will 3-bet, of course, the top portion of my range in the top left, aces, kings, queens, ace, king. In order to balance my value, I do need to have some bluffs. So in optimal strategy, you need to have at least a 50-50 ratio of value and bluffs. As far as being unbalanced, that's a topic for another day. We can definitely be unbalanced in many situations, but in the realm of being balanced, I'll have some ace deuce suited, ace three suited to balance with my ace king suited. So if we know we have 4 combos of ace king suited, I might have 4 combos of ace deuce suited, perfectly balanced. I will also throw in some suited connector 3-bets in there. This is purely for board coverage. It's also going to help me generate some EV by folding out better hands pre-flop. If I'm 3-betting 7-6 suited and getting, king 10 offsuit to fold, that's already a win in itself. I'm generating like 4 or 5 big blinds pre-flop, but I'm also going to have terrific board coverage when the flop comes 8-7-4, right? So this is more or less what would be generally a sound 3-betting strategy at 100 big blinds effective. This is the button response. Again, really quick because we have a lot of these slides. We're calling quite a bit, 18%. We're 3-betting 7%, so mostly calling. This is the simplified strategy. So this is how I would adjust as opposed to doing this weird mishmash of balancing. I would just probably pure call some hands and pure 3-bet some hands. It's still going to be very difficult to play against. And especially if you're playing online where they are, hundreds and hundreds of people in the field that you're playing, they're not going to be able to exploit your strategy. For live tournaments, very, very similar. Like if you're playing a strategy like this, it's still very difficult to exploit. And then the small blind response. So something we'll look at here, just 17% call, 6% 3-bet. So we're still mostly calling. We can do a lot of calling out of position when we're this deep. And here's the big blind. Every single suited hand is calling. We're never folding. We're continuing with 2/3 of our hands, and we're doing very, very little 3-betting. So this would be my personally big blind simplified strategy. I'll 3-bet my top of range, some suited connectors, and some high-low blockers to balance with ace-king. Let's look at the cutoff. So the cutoff is going to open quite a bit. Almost 40% of hands is technically, theoretically optimal. This is going to be the button response. So the first thing we notice is the button is going to be able to be quite loose against the cutoff. If we know that the cutoff is opening 36% of hands, and I'll send the deck, maybe Victor will send it if anyone wants to have the charts, but when we know that the cutoff is opening 36%, the button has free reign to 3-bet quite wide. The button's going to be able to 3-bet 11%. They're also not afraid to call 20%, 1/5 of their hands. You can see here, like King 5 suited is making it in there, King 6 suited, 9-7 suited. That's a pretty high implied odds hand. But generally speaking, the wider that your opponents are, it gives you free reign to be a bit more creative. Here's the small blind. Again, 27% continuation, 29% almost. Mostly calling, 18%. We can still call out of position this deep. And then here's the big blind. So 9% 3-bet and 66% call. Getting a little bit more spicy with the 3-betting. Again, because you are the last person to act. You're closing the action. And we know the cutoff's opening 36%. So we can have some linear 3-betting and some splash, I guess some high-low bluffs mixed in there as well. What if I could ask someone who wants to try to answer this, why would we 3-bet a hand like King 6 offsuit? I know it's only a sliver. In my personal strategy, I would 3-bet some of these hands. Why would we 3-bet King 6 offsuit? Do I see a hand raised?
Keeps your 3-betting range balanced, and also it blocks like 6s and then all the King Broadway hands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
Because your big blind range is forward.
Yeah. Both answers are correct. Yeah. So again, it's a matter of balancing. We also just accomplish, again, when we're 3-betting as a bluff, what's the main goal? We don't have to get too complicated. We're just trying to fold out better hands, right? That's really that's the main goal. If we're 3-betting a hand like King 6 off, we're gonna get king 7, king 8, king 9 off, these hands to fold. And the thing that we should also remember is this is just the default theoretical ranges. If we know that our opponents are going to fold to a lot of our 3-bets, what should we be doing? 3-betting more. We're going to get way more hands that are better than us to fold and generate simple EV. And then when we have it, we're going to get into spots where we can win big pots. So as you can see, 9% 3-bet from the big blind, that's like 1 in 11, almost 1 in 10 of all the combos of hands that you get. Button ranges. Button ranges, super wide, 54%. You can see where I'm going with this. The small blind is going to take advantage of this. 15% 3-bet, 15% call. And this is, again, because if the button is opening 54% of hands, we cannot let the button run amok. We need to punish them. All right? Yes, 15 and 14. This is the big blind response. Pretty similar again, 14% 3-bet, 62% call. This differentiates significantly against the early position open where we only had a 4% 3-bet because the early position open is quite tight. All right, EP ranges and responses, 50% ICM. So now we have half the field remaining. That's what 50% ICM would indicate. Early position still going to open 18%. What is the main thing that we see different here from the cutoff? Anyone want to take a stab?
3-bet more.
3-betting a little more. Our call dropped in half. I believe the call was 16%. So half the hands that we would normally call, completely gone. It's a big, big shift. Before, I want to say it was like 77% fold. It's 84% fold now. And that's all pretty much coming out of the call. The 3-bet went up a tick, maybe. I think it might have been 6%. And this is the button response. Before, it was about 6% and 18, something like this. Now we're at 8 and 11. Significantly less flatting, a little bit more 3-betting. So what are the biggest adjustments? Yeah, we're calling significantly less. We're 3-betting a little bit more. The other thing is, where did that come from? So all of our implied odds hands, you could see 7-6 suited, 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited. Because we're playing 50 big blinds instead of 100 big blinds, these hands are stripped out. It may seem like a good idea to 3-bet these hands or get in the mix, but the reality is it's going to be typically a little bit too spicy unless you know that your opponents are overfolding. We're not really looking to play pots in position with these hands. Again, unless you believe you have a post-flop edge, then we can get a little bit wider, but this is taking into consideration a perfectly playing GTO robot versus a perfectly playing GTO robot. So implied odds go down as chip stack, effective stacks go down, and that's where we're stripping some of our range. As far as 3-betting goes, we're going to be 3-betting a lot more small suited aces, and that's where the 3-betting goes up from. Why is it good to 3-bet these hands at lower depths? Anyone? It's very simple. The ace, yeah.
You block aces and ace king and you can make the wheels.
Yeah. It's really as simple as it is. When our 3-betting range, in terms of our value, is only aces, ace king, ace queen, ace jack, it's very heavy around the ace, right? Obviously, we have some kings and queens in there, but most of it is going to be the value that has an ace. So when we have ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited, we block quite a bit of the top-end value. Aces, combos of aces drop from 6 to 3. So the probability that if we have an ace, someone else has aces goes down, by 50%. So yeah, that's really where the uptick in 3-betting comes from. And then this is going to be the small blind response. So before, again, we were doing a lot more calling. Calling has dropped down, 3-betting has gone up. Big blind response is fairly unchanged. So in summary, for specifically the time check. Let's see. Perfect, because we're halfway through. So in summary for the chip EV versus 50% ICM, we're doing more 3-betting, less calling in position once we get to 50%. We're doing more blocker-heavy 3-bets in position. We're very happy to take the chips down. If someone's opening and we're 3-betting, we're usually winning about 5-6 bigs. That's going to increase our stack by 10%. In tournaments, this is a massive win. We have less incentive to see flops and play high implied odds hands post-flop. The big blind strategy is fairly unchanged, 100 to 50. The best way to think about ICM from an extreme perspective and try to brain solve some of these things, if you were to take, on a scale of 1 to 10, satellite ICM would be a 10. So let's say 6th place gets 0. 1st through 5th gets the exact same payout in the form of 10 buy-ins. This is going to exude significantly more ICM pressure and risk premium in the decisions that you have to make, but also the pressure that you can apply knowing that your opponent's risk premiums are also affected. Versus, a regular tournament, 5th gets 2 buy-ins, 4th gets 3, 1st gets 15. It's basically a staircase, an escalating payout structure. So here the risk premiums and the decisions you make in heavy ICM are not going to be as heavy as they would be in a satellite structure. And you can play for the win, so to speak, a little bit more in a payout structure like this. All right, 50% ICM button ranges. So we're still opening 50% of hands at 50 big blinds effective. Very, very wide ranges from the button. A lot of the suited hands are still opening. Really, the folds are just going to come from a lot of the very disconnected offsuit hands. The best way to think about this, if your hand doesn't make a straight, you're probably folding it. 9-5 suited can flop 8-7-6. 9-4 suited cannot. Best way to think about it in a vacuum, but the more disconnected your hands are, you're not opening. But generally, this is quite wide. 52%. Small blind response. What's the first thing we notice here? The 3-bet is 17%. So in the previous example where it was just pure chip EV, we were doing about 18% calling and maybe like 7% 3-betting, if my memory's correct. The switch is basically flipped. So we're playing a shallower depth. We're at 50 big blinds instead of 100. We are actually 3-betting more, even though we have shallower depths. Seems counterintuitive, but it's because we're able to apply significantly more pressure. Again, because of the risk premium associated with making our decisions in heavy ICM. So if we know that the button is opening 52%, small blind's going to capitalize. They're going to 3-bet 18%. They're still going to call. The hands that they're going to call with are going to be pretty much primarily just suited hands. You could see Queen Jack suited, King Jack suited. Some of the better ace-X suited hands are going to make it in the mix. And we can still call with some of the implied odds pairs. They're getting a great price to see a flop and flop a set. So mostly 3-betting. The big blind is doing 14% 3-betting, which is quite a bit from the big blind. And again, we're just punishing the button for opening so much. 20% ICM. So we're getting pretty close to the money. Usually it's 12 to 15% that pays. EP range, still going to be the same, untouched. It's about 19% in terms of what would be considered correct. The cutoff response, even tighter. So before, I believe we had maybe like 6 and 8 at 6.5, 7.5 now. So as we get closer to the bubble, the cutoff's going to be a little bit more snug here. They're not doing that much flatting compared to the button. This is symmetrical stacks. Everyone has the same stack. The risk premium is identical for every player. This would be a risk premium advantage. So in a nutshell, this is very intuitive. If you have a bigger stack than the person that's opening, you can bully them. we're going from a 6.5% 3-bet to a 9.5% 3-bet cutoff versus early position. Oops, sorry. This is symmetrical, so you can see all of the suited Broadway hands are typically not going to 3-bet here, and the reason's quite simple. You've got a very pretty hand in King Jack suited and King Queen suited. If you 3-bet your hand and get 4-bet, you hate your life. You have to fold, and your hand is very good. These hands are going to perform very, very well post-flop. You're going to have a great amount of board coverage, and you're still going to have a lot of equity advantage on certain board textures. You know, if the flop comes king high and you've got king queen suited, it's a pretty good situation when the early position player is going to try to represent the king. The risk premium advantage, you can see again, we're doing a lot more 3-betting with all of our suited aces. That's primarily where the 3-bets come from, and we're still happy to call with our suited Broadways for the most part. The button response, 6.5% 3-bet, 10% call. So all the implied odds hands are, for the most part, stripped out here. We don't have any suited connectors really at 35 effective. It's just not worth risking chips, seeing a pair, and then having to fold on a later street. The best way to think about ICM is that losing chips is more detrimental than gaining chips would be beneficial, is the best way to think about ICM in a nutshell. And this would be the button response when they cover. So again, a little bit more 3-betting. We go from 6.5% to 8%. Poker really is a game of frequencies. When you can capitalize on exploiting your opponents based on what you perceive their frequencies to be, you're going to make a lot of money in the long run. If you know they're opening too tight, you adjust your frequencies. If you know they're opening too wide, you adjust their frequencies. If you know they're overfolding to 3-bets, you adjust your frequencies, right? That's all poker is. Well, I don't want to say that's all poker is, sorry. But that's a huge part of generating EV in tournaments pre-flop, is just understanding frequencies. Small blind response. Against the early position player, we're not doing a lot of 3-betting, 6%, 11% call. When the small blind covers, again, this is going to go up to 9%. And the big blind response, fairly unchanged. They just never really you never really 3-bet big blind versus early position. It's not really a thing. You have a lot of traps here, like ace queen suited, ace king off. Sometimes you're calling. It's just not really a sound strategy to 3-bet big blind versus early. Or you have to be very good at balancing some of your junky combos with, you know, your aces and your kings and your ace king. And this is where the big blind covers. I mean, again, like we're just happy to flat. Very, very happy to see a flop and close the action. These are the button ranges, 20% ICM. So you can see a significant tick down in the opening rate. We go from 55 to 43%, but it's still going to be quite wide. Where do the hands come out of? The 10-5 suited, 9-5 suited, Jack deuce suited, Jack 3 suited. So the more disconnected we get, we can start to fold some of these hands. And this is going to be the small blind response. We have a new color, purple. The main thing that we want to take a look at here, as we're closer to the bubble, of course, stacks are going to be more shallow. So we're playing 30 big blinds effective in this example. We have a lot of 30 big blind 3-bet jams. Seems like a lot of blinds to jam. It's very good. We have a lot of fold equity that we generate. And again, we're very happy to pick up the 5 big blinds. In this case, it's going to add almost 20% to our stack. The ace-5 suit, like typically the wheel aces, ace deuce, all the way up to ace-7 suited. You're very happy to jam these. I'll pose the question here. Why is the range built like this? If anyone wants to take a stab. Why do we have king 10 suited, you know, queen 10 suited seems a bit crazy, no? So again, we get to fold out better hands. It's really that simple. We get to fold out better hands. We pick up 20% of our stack. We chip up by 20% of our stack. We're going to perform quite well, even when we're called. Ace 7 suited, even if we're called by a better ace, we're still going to have at least 30% equity. But we're just not getting called that often at 20% ICM because the risk premium for the other player, if they're aware of it, it is going to go up. So I want to make a caveat here. This is not a good strategy if your opponent doesn't fold. If your opponent understands ICM, this is a good strategy. So we will have to adjust, right? If we know that our opponent is going to abide by a profitable ICM strategy, you see this especially online because people are playing thousands of tournaments a year. So they're going to optimize for a profitable approach to the game. We can profitably, basically 30 big blind ship all these hands. Their risk premium at 20% ICM might be +8, +9%. So in a spot where they think they need 44% equity, maybe they need 52%, right? Here is the small blind response with a risk premium advantage. So we cover the button opener now, 36-30. You would think we do more jamming. We don't. We do less jamming. Why? Does anyone want to take a stab? No bad answers here. Yeah.
Your risk premium is too high.
Yes. Yeah. No bad answers. No judgment.
You can get the fold equity
Yeah.
because you cover them without putting your whole stack.
Bingo. We can get the fold with a much more efficient way without risking our stack. If we 3-bet not all in, it's very difficult for the opponent to 4-bet jam 30 big blinds, like on the bubble or at 18% field. If they're a sicko, they'll find it. They'll have the 4-bet jam. Most players don't. So we can 3-bet not all in and accomplish the same thing. And it's theoretically correct to do so. We go from having a 7% 3-bet jam to a 4% 3-bet jam. Here's the big blind response with symmetrical stacks. We could start to mix in some jamming here, 30 effective. Something surprising here. Anyone want to point it out? The King X region is doing the 3-bet jamming, not the Ace X region. Anyone want to guess why? No bad answers. Yes?
You want to fold out like raggedy aces, so you want them to have those hands?
Yeah, again, like we're folding out better hands. The main reason we're 3-bet jamming the King X suited hands is because you always want to think about what is your opponent's action or what are the hands that they're going to call, right? If we're jamming a hand like Ace 5 suited, yes, we do have a blocker, the Ace, which is very good. Ultimately, it's only going to reduce combos by a fraction, right? Let's say 15, 20%, whatever. If we jam Ace 5 suited, they're still going to call Ace King, Ace Queen, Ace Jack. So we're going to be dominated quite a bit. What happens when we jam King 5 suited? Are they going to call King Jack suited? Are they going to call King Queen suited for 30 bigs on the bubble? No. So we're never getting it in dominated with King 5 suited unless it's exactly Ace King or Aces. All we care about is picking up the chips pre-flop, and we're never going to be dominated with the King X. So this is something that you, again, see quite a bit online, especially in tournaments like bounty tournaments, because we know that jamming King 5 suited for 30 big blinds, the other player is probably going to fold King Jack, King Queen. So when we get called, we have tremendous equity for the bounty. Yeah.
But then, sorry, so why are the unsuited wheel aces jamming more than the suited ones? Or is it just like solver things?
Just solver things. The King 5, the main thing to point out here is just the suited kings are the more viable strategy than the suited aces in this specific scenario. And again, in bounty tournaments, it's even better because we are incentivized to jam when we cover. We have more fold equity on bubbles. If we get called by a hand like Ace Queen, king 5 is going to have like 40% in a situation where we also cover for the bounty. What do we got here? Big blind response with a significant risk premium advantage. Again, we're actually going from 4% all in basically to never having an all in because we have such a significant stack advantage. The button player really has to be creative or have the oomph to 4-bet jam hands, so we can get away with just 3-bet not all in. Yeah. What do we have here? ICM 20% button versus big blind 3-bet. So this is the perspective of the button player when they get 3-bet. I don't think that most players play this strategy. When the big blind on the bubble is 3-betting us, this is what the button is supposed to call. I mean, I guess this isn't really the bubble, it's 20%, but it's fairly close. If we have a 15% payout, this is getting very, very close. So the button is supposed to defend against 8 big blinds for basically a third of their stack, a quarter of their stack. They're supposed to defend queen 9 suited, jack 9 suited, ace 6 suited, right? Pocket 5s just flatting pocket 6s. Like, this is a strategy that most players just don't play. And so again, you always have to take into perspective what if you're going to check a solver to see if you're doing something good. Just remember, the players you're playing against are not necessarily having these calling ranges, and because of that, we have to have probably a different strategy from the big blind. So if the button isn't going to defend hands like ace 7 suited, ace 6 suited, queen 9 suited, now we should actually be 3-betting even more from the big blind because the button is not going to be defending appropriately enough. Does that make sense? Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Yep.
Sorry, so is part of this because you have position on the big blind? Like, if this is blind versus blind, I'm assuming as a small blind you call way less, right? Or is that not correct?
Sorry. So if in your example,
so if you go to just the one from right before, so here where you call like a pretty decent amount.
oh, because we're in position as the button. Yes.
That was my question. So just in blind versus blind.
Well,
if it falls to the small blind should also be very wide. So then the big blind also will like
correct.
Raise pretty wide as well.
Correct. Yeah, I don't have blind versus blind charts up for this session, but yeah, you're thinking about it in the right way. If the small blind, let's say all things considered, stacks are the same, so the risk premiums are identical. If the small blind is going to open, let's say 30% of their hands, we should be 3-betting from the big blind. Yeah. And then again, the main thing to remember here is when we're looking at the solve, it's going to tell us that we should defend ace 7 suited or ace 6 suited. It's not a strategy that most people will actually copy. And so from the big blind, we can be 3-betting more in order to exploit the fact that people are defending maybe 10% instead of 20% here. Let's look at some actual bubble ICM. So here's the button open. It goes back up from 45 to almost 50%. We're taking advantage of the fact that we're right on the bubble. Risk premiums are higher. Small blind response, again, we're doing some jamming here. The raise is 14%, so it's pretty high. 14% of our combos are going to be 3-betting at symmetrical risk directly on the bubble. And this is with a risk premium advantage. So we tick up from 14% to 17%. If you cover the stack that's opening, you're allowed to 3-bet a little bit more. Yeah, pretty simple. But where it gets interesting is from the big blind perspective. The big blind is still doing quite a bit of flatting. Even at symmetrical stacks, we're very happy to take it to the streets, so to speak. About 8% 3-betting. Every single suited hand that you get is going to be an appropriate defend. What I will say is if you're uncomfortable defending a hand like 8 deuce suited, 9 deuce suited on the bubble, it's okay to fold the bottom of your range. No one's gonna give you a penalty for folding 8 deuce suited. You could play however you want. What's important to note here, though, is we're going to have quite a bit of board coverage because we literally have every single hand. You can rep any board from the big blind because you have every single suited combination. And this is the risk premium advantage. So at 55 versus 30 big blinds, this should be, what is this, big blind response? Yes. So we're doing some 30 big blind jams here. 10-9 suited, Jack-10 suited, Queen-9 suited, some small pocket pairs, some suited kings. We could do some suited aces as well. Just generating some massive, massive fold equity on the direct bubble. Let's do a time check. I got a couple hands that we'll talk through here. 6:55.
A couple more minutes.
Couple more minutes. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Let's just do this one hand then. So cutoff is opening into the big blind on 5-3-3. That's the board that we get. It's a single raised pot. This is going to be the cutoff open off of 30 blinds. So they're opening 50%. They're actually allowed to open jam about 8% of their hands. And again, this is because they cover the rest of the table. They cover the button, small blind, and the big blind. They're very happy to just apply as much pressure as possible, take the blinds down pre-flop. They're folding 45%. Here's the single raise pot, 5-3-3. This is going to be the standard play from the big blind. We're never really doing any leading on 5-3-3. In a situation where we're covered. We don't want to bet into a stack that's bigger than us. If we bet here and get raised, it's not going to really look great if we have a 5. It only looks good if we have a 3. These are symmetrical stacks. This is how crazy the strategy changes when the risk premium changes with it. When the stacks are when we're covered, we're doing basically mostly checking. When the stacks are symmetrical, so the exact same stack, we have a 50% donking strategy. Why? The cutoff is not going to have that many threes. They only have ace-3, and that's it. Maybe they have king-3 suited. So the big blind basically has every single suited 3 possible if you're defending every suited combination. So we're allowed to start to lead out here and apply pressure to the opponent's range. The opponent is going to have a stronger range, so we are very happy to fold out better hands. For example, if you're always leading a 3, you've got to balance it with some bluffs. Maybe you'll have a hand like 6-4 suited. Seems like a good bluff. You're open-ended. You could catch a deuce or a 7 for a straight. You're also very happy to fold out ace-king. Maybe ace-king will call the flop and then hesitate on the turn and fold. But we can balance appropriately because if we do get called down, sometimes we have the 3. We generate a lot of EV in poker by just getting the opponent to fold, whether we have it or not. We're always happy to pick up money when our opponents fold. So if you have a 3 and you lead and they call and they fold the turn, don't feel so bad. Maybe you wouldn't have got the stacks in anyways because they've got ace high, right? And the last slide here, since I know we're at time, this is going to be where the big blind significantly covers the cutoff opening player. Now we have a 60% donking strategy on 5-3-3. So we're just completely taking advantage of the fact that the cutoff doesn't have a 3. Yeah. That's an hour. I know Victor was waving me down with 2 minutes left. Happy to answer questions here as we wrap the session. Any questions in a vacuum? Yeah.
As you get deeper in a tournament,
Yeah.
if it's a bounty,
Okay.
how much do you factor that into your 3-bet?
So playing for the bounty versus 3-betting.
Like playing for the bounties versus trying to go deeper.
Yeah. So the simple answer would be bounties can be converted to big blinds. Essentially, you should always know how much a bounty is worth in chips. This is going to give you the exact equity that you need to call. So let's say that you think you need around 40% equity to make a call. I know your situation was 3-bet, but to call for a bounty. If their bounty is worth like 5 big blinds, based on the conversion that you do from dollars to blinds, your equity to call goes down. So maybe from 40%, you need like 30%. And then you also have to factor in, just because I have the right price, what is it going to do for me in terms of my stack relative to everyone else? Am I calling off like 20% of my stack? Am I calling off half my stack? 80%? And then you kind of have to really factor in, is the bounty plus the chips profitable enough versus the risk factor of me losing X amount of my stack? So there's like a future game calculation or component that you kind of have to brain solve.